estates on land that should never have been plowed up, or if it has been plowed up, should have been used in a much more sensible and in a better rotational way. In other words, row crops, meaning today corn and soybeans in Iowa, are not good things for the land in some of the southern portions of the state, the western, and the more rolling sections of northeastern Iowa. And even in the black level land area, the land needs a rest once in a while. It needs it from the standpoint of microbiology. It needs it from the standpoint of restructuring of total amount of humus. It needs it from soil insect standpoint. When we get into the rolling sections that have been farmed now for almost 100 years, we've had losses, soil losses in actual topsoil, which are disheartening. They run as high as 80 and 90% of the topsoil gone. Now, there are ways that you can get down into this subsoil and use a lot of fertilizer on it and pour it on, but you aren't going to stop that movement of soil from the tops of the hills or the sides of the hills to the bottomland. And so this is, in my estimation, trying to tell you that we were going to have to reduce probably from 12 million acres of corn that we had this year and 5 and a fraction million acres of soybeans in Iowa down to something perhaps more like 70 or 80% of that figure if we're going to have a proper land use program. So if all these things that we're looking at are part of a picture of proper use and trying to guide ourselves for the future, we probably are saying that maybe we can't do as good a job or turn out as many bushels of grain and of soybeans in the future as we have in the past. This may not be true if our agronomic progress continues. But there's a point at which this graph of, the graph, the line continues and finally quits. It gets up here about a certain point, and then all these added inputs begin to, you begin to get this curve leveling out. And you have a reduction regardless of the amount of inputs. This is a good example is fertilizer. You get a tremendous response from the first 3, 4, 5, 10 pounds you put on, but as you go on up the level and you get up to 150 and 200 and 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre, why the response curve begins to drop way off, and so the returns are much less. And the same is true of many of the other things that we possibly can put into this soil, because there's one thing that controls what you're ever going to get out of the land, and we had a good example of it this year. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't raise corn out in western Iowa in some areas without rain. And this is a tremendous asset also that we have. We have a combination here of land with a history of early forests after the last glacier 18,000 years ago in this area, and then after about 3,000 to 5,000 years of fir, we had pine, and excuse me, the other way around. We had pine first, and then we had several thousand years of fir, and then we came to oak, and we had a long protracted period of drought, and then we had about 10,000 years of prairie here because the oak even died out from the drought. And now we've got this marvelous prairie-built soil on which we have inland, the farthest of any place in the world, an adequate rainfall to grow these crops. We're inland here, as you know, from the closest ocean water about 1,000 miles, and there's no place in the world that has rainfall comparable to this that far inland. And with it, we have the people here. And the people who came here had the ambition and the capability to carry this program out of taking advantage of our beautiful resources, and as a result, we have a production. But now, here we are in a country with all the things, all the adjuncts of modern living. We got bulldozers that can just move mountains. My goodness, when we were young people and we're looking at the capability to do things with moving dirt or bulldozing trees, there was nothing in the way of power equal to it. I look at these trucks and I think, gee, look at that massive Ford truck. I can remember when a Ford truck had a Ford passenger engine in it. It just couldn't possibly have even begun to move the loads that the Ford trucks do today. And the same is true of the Chevrolets and the other makes. But so
As a result, we're now capable of more destruction. We've got just, we can pour more junk into the air through the exhaust pipes. We can go out with bulldozers and we can take a hill out here and make a flat terrain out of it. We need an airport, or we want some other use for it, or we want to shoot billiards on it, or whatever we'd like to do. We can move a mountain. We don't have too many mountains in Iowa, but we can sure move a lot of land. And this is one of the other problems that we have. This encourages construction-destruction. I think in terms of looking at the skyline of Des Moines, of course, perhaps I'm at the age where status quo looks better to me than progress, but they put up some buildings recently in Des Moines which really, in my estimation, weren't really needed. I guess the people who built them thought they were, and perhaps the people who construct them were happy to have them constructed, but that new financial center down there is vacated, the Iowa Des Moines National Bank building, which I thought was quite a lovely place when you went inside. If you were in Europe, that building would have been used for about 300 more years. And, and yet it's abandoned. It's a vacant building. It looks sick. But these people who are using these buildings and have used them, they have no concept as to how much they're doing to the elements as far as fuels are concerned. And so they build a great big new building, it's got to be air conditioned and heated. We have many of these things that are occurring today that present problems that relate themselves back to agriculture, because the fuel that we're running out of now is going to fall, a lot of it, back onto the shoulders of agriculture. The fuel that could go to make, for instance, some of the replacements in the way of food, it's out of the window. We've got to have fuel to operate agriculture also. So with people multiplying in the world, we're now faced with we're at the point today where people in starvation are going to demand that we give up some things here. And we're going to come to a traditional and transitional period where our diets are going to be different. We're going to be probably, over a period of time, pricing ourselves in the major portion of the public away from meat, milk, and eggs, which are converted grain. And as this price level keeps people out of that area, we will begin to transist with more and more grain consumption around the world. But we are a responsible group of people. We're looking at it from the standpoint of how can we help not only ourselves, but the other people in the world that are depending upon us. And we've got to do a better job of conserving the amount of land we use for roads and for new construction and for the destruction of the land for other purposes. Now, I haven't said anything about the ecology or the need to protect for wildlife, but that goes hand in hand with good agriculture. And that's why we need to retire some of this land I talked about back into wildlife areas. Thank you very much.
This conference is confronted with a food problem also. We really have to get going with the questions, and perhaps there will only be about 10 minutes time. Perhaps after we break for... All right. Then we will have about 10 minutes for you to ask Dr. Burns, Riney, John, or Walter a question. I know you have many of them. Would you please identify yourself and indicate which gentleman, or perhaps all four, that you would like to have answer the question? All right. You must all be hungry. Well, I have a few questions, but I don't think that's my job. Jim? You have one? Okay, Jim?
Jim Sinatra from the Department of Landscape Architecture. To Walter, how do you feel about the irreversible use of prime agricultural farmland in this central area?
The irreversible
Use.
All right, let me repeat the question. Jim has asked this question: how do you feel about the irreversible use of farmland?
For urbanization or industry.
Okay.
maybe I'll have to ask for clarification on that question. Do you mean that it's irreversible in the sense that we can't take it from agriculture and put it into something else?
From agriculture to urbanization.
You know, building
Yes.
kind of thing.
How do I feel about the reversible use of it, you mean, don't you?
Yeah. One thing,
Well, I think that there has to be certainly a thoughtful use of it, and in the areas where the prime farmland is available, it seems to me that let's just take the Boone Ames area, for instance. We have a tremendous amount of land up and down the Des Moines River that perhaps is best exemplified in the Boone area by the fact there are more state camps there than any other place in the state. This happens to be the end of the black level land glaciated area, and it was like a bulldozer coming down here leveling this land off. Well, then the river has fall, so up at Fort Dodge there's not nearly as deep a chasm as there is down here in the Boone area. But when you get to Des Moines, you're out. You're just getting out of the Wisconsin drift, and you're into the Kansas drift, which is 1,000,000 years old, and they don't have a chasm there as a result. But we could put housing into some of this, because we're not a very big community anyway. It wouldn't take too much of that land, relatively speaking, for housing. But I think we should use the non-prime area for our housing uses, if possible, and leave the black level land area as much as possible for agriculture. Does that answer your question?
should we zone it that way?
Should we zone it that way? I think a hard look needs to be taken at zoning. I'm really ashamed of the fact that Boone County doesn't have zoning. It's going to come someday. Story County has zoning, and I think that you certainly would probably not want to go out in an area of the type of land that I'm talking about and say, now we're going to zone this residential. If somebody had a real highly technical business going out there that involved manufacturing and so on, but some of the better land that from a residential standpoint is not agricultural really. It's pasture land, and that's all, and it's a low grade of pasture land. That's one point I want to make too about pasture and livestock. We're throwing away, or not really throwing away because we're plowing it under, but we're going to come to a time when we're going to utilize more of the cellulose from the production of corn and soybeans, the stalks basically, for livestock purposes, and use more confinement livestock programs than we are pasture, because we've got such a tremendous amount of energy in that cellulose that can be converted to livestock as compared to this rough land. You get a little growth in May, and that's the end of it, and the rest of the summer it's nothing, you know. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, why don't we break and return at 7:15. The cafeteria is open. Oh,